A waitress, trying to ditch her ex, plopped down on a billionaire's lap. He leaned in close and murmured, "Just play along. I'll protect you." What if a single, desperate act could flip your whole world upside down? Picture this. A quaint, small-town diner on a drizzly Thursday night. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee hangs in the air, mingling with the soft murmur of hushed conversations. Behind the counter stands Julia, a warm-hearted waitress whose friendly smile has been a beacon in this cozy corner for nearly 8 years. At 35, she's learned to appreciate life's simple pleasures. A regular's usual order, the delighted squeal of a child over chocolate chip pancakes, the golden afternoon sunlight streaming through the diner's windows. These are the things that bring her joy. But tonight feels different. Her hands tremble ever so slightly as she refills coffee cups, her eyes darting nervously towards the entrance. She's been dreading this moment for weeks, knowing it was only a matter of time before he found her. And then, that familiar, unwelcome silhouette appears in the doorway, and her heart pounds in her chest like a drum. Where are you tuning in from tonight, friends? The Golden Spoon Diner had been Julia's safe haven for years, a place where she could pour her energy into caring for others while slowly mending wounds that ran deeper than most people knew. The regulars had become like family to her. Old Mr. Peterson with his Tuesday morning crossword puzzle, the young mom who brought her twins in for Saturday pancakes, the group of retired teachers who gathered every Friday for their book club discussions over slices of warm apple pie. Julia moved through her evening routine with effortless grace, her auburn hair neatly pulled back in a simple ponytail, her uniform crisp and spotless, even after a long day. She'd always taken pride in her work, finding dignity in honest labor and genuine connection with the people she served. The diner's owner, Mrs. Chun, often remarked that Julia had a special way of making everyone feel at home, like they truly mattered. But that gift felt fragile tonight as memories she'd fought so hard to suppress came rushing back. 3 months ago, she'd finally mustered the courage to leave Derek after 2 years of walking on eggshells, never knowing what might trigger his explosive temper. The bruises had faded, but the fear still lurked within her, like a caged bird fluttering anxiously whenever she heard heavy footsteps or raised voices. She'd moved to this sleepy town, hoping for a fresh start, renting a small apartment above the bakery where the comforting scent of fresh bread somehow made her feel safer. For a while it had worked. She'd started sleeping through the night again, laughing without constantly looking over her shoulder, and actually believing that maybe, just maybe, she deserved the peace she'd found. In the corner booth sat a man she'd noticed before, distinguished, probably in his early 40s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled at her gentle jokes. His name was Jonathan, and unlike most customers who rushed through their meals, he seemed to genuinely savor the diner's simple comfort. He dressed well, but never looked down on anyone, always thanking her warmly and leaving generous tips that helped her save for the small dreams she was slowly daring to have again. Tonight, Jonathan was engrossed in a worn paperback novel, occasionally glancing up to watch the rain streak down the windows. There was something calming about his presence, something that made her shoulders relax just a little as she went about her work. But then the bell above the door chimed again, and her world seemed to tilt off its axis. Derek stood in the doorway, his dark hair damp from the rain, his eyes scanning the diner with that predatory intensity she remembered all too well. He looked exactly the same, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of effortless charm that had fooled her for far too long. She watched him spot her behind the counter and saw that familiar smile spread across his face, the one that used to make her heart skip a beat, but now made her stomach clench with dread. He'd found her. After 3 months of careful hiding, of changed phone numbers and deleted social media accounts, of jumping at every unexpected sound, he'd tracked her down to this small haven she'd built for herself. Julia's hands shook as she gripped the coffee pot, her mind racing through impossible escape routes, while Derek started walking toward the counter with that confident stride that had once made her feel protected, but now made her feel trapped. Derek's voice carried across the diner like it always had, smooth and commanding, effortlessly drawing attention. "Well, look what I found," he said, sliding onto a stool at the counter with the same easy confidence that had initially drawn her in years ago. My beautiful Julia playing house in a little small-town diner. Her hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "What do you want, Derek?" she whispered, glancing around at the other customers, hoping her distress wasn't too obvious. "What do I want?" He chuckled softly, leaning forward with those piercing blue eyes that used to make her feel like the only woman in the world. "I want to talk to my girlfriend." "Is that such a crime?" "I'm not your girlfriend anymore," she managed, her voice barely audible. "I told you we were done." "Oh, sweetheart." His voice dropped to that dangerous register she knew all too well. "You don't get to decide that. Not after everything I've done for you, everything I've given you. You think you can just run away and play pretend in some backwater town?" The elderly couple at table 6 glanced over, sensing the tension, and Julia forced a shaky smile in their direction. She couldn't let this escalate here, couldn't let her problems disrupt the peaceful evening these good people deserved. "Please," she whispered, "just go. I'm working." "I'm not going anywhere without you." Derek's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist across the counter, his grip firm enough to leave marks. "We need to talk, and we're gonna talk. You've had your little adventure, but it's time to come home." In the corner booth, Jonathan looked up from his book, his expression shifting from casual interest to sharp concern as he took in the scene. Without thinking, Julia's eyes met his, a silent plea for help passing between them. Derek followed her gaze, and his jaw tightened. "Friend of yours?" he asked, his voice carrying a warning that made Julia's blood run cold. "She's everyone's friend here," came a calm voice from behind Derek. Jonathan had approached quietly, his presence suddenly filling the space between Julia and her tormentor. "And you're making her uncomfortable." Derek slowly turned, sizing up this unexpected interference. At 43, Jonathan carried himself with quiet authority, his expensive suit and confident bearing suggesting he wasn't easily intimidated. "I'm sorry. I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Jonathan Mitchell, and I'm a regular here." "Derek Walsh," he replied, his grip on Julia's wrist tightening slightly. "And this is a private conversation between me and my girlfriend." "Former girlfriend?" Jonathan corrected gently, his eyes never leaving Derek's face. "And since she's clearly upset, perhaps it's time you respected her wishes and left." The tension in the diner was palpable now. Other customers had stopped eating, watching the confrontation unfold. Mrs. Chan emerged from the kitchen, her weathered face creased with worry. Derek's smile turned cold. "I think you should mind your own business, friend." "Julia's well-being is my business," Jonathan replied quietly. "Just like it's the business of everyone who cares about her. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up. The kindness of strangers can change everything." Derek's eyes narrowed dangerously, and Julia realized with growing horror that this peaceful evening was about to become something much, much worse. Derek's laugh was sharp and humorless as he stood up from the stool, his 6-foot frame towering over both Julia and Jonathan. "You know what? I've had enough of this little game." His grip on Julia's wrist tightened until she winced, and something primitive and dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Julia, we're leaving now." "No," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Yes, you are." Derek's voice dropped to that whisper she remembered from their worst fights, the tone that always preceded the worst of his anger. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone in this pathetic little town knows exactly what kind of woman you really are. How you used me, lied to me, stole from me when you ran away like a coward in the night." The words hit her like physical blows. Julia felt the familiar shame creeping up her neck, the way Derek had always made her feel small and worthless whenever she tried to stand up for herself. Around them, the diner had gone completely silent. Mrs. Chun stood frozen by the kitchen door, and Julia could feel the weight of every customer's stare. "That's enough," Jonathan said firmly, stepping closer. "Let go of her." "Or what?" Derek's smile turned vicious. "What are you going to do about it, suit boy? Call the police?" Tell them what exactly? That a man is talking to his girlfriend? In that moment, Julia felt the familiar paralysis creeping over her. The same helpless terror that had kept her trapped for 2 years. Derek knew exactly which buttons to push, how to make her feel like everything was her fault, like she deserved whatever was coming. But then she looked into Jonathan's eyes and saw something that took her breath away. Not pity or judgment, but genuine concern and an unexpected fierceness that reminded her she wasn't alone anymore. She asked you to leave, Jonathan repeated calmly, though Julia could see the tension in his shoulders. That should be enough. Derek's patience finally snapped. I'm tired of this, he snarled, yanking Julia forward so hard she stumbled against the counter. You want to play hero? Fine, but she's coming with me one way or another. The pain in her wrist where he gripped her sent memories flooding back, other bruises. Other moments when Derek's charm had faded away to reveal the cruel reality underneath. But this time something was different. This time, she wasn't facing him alone. Without thinking, acting purely on instinct and desperation, Julia twisted away from Derek's grip and half fell, half ran toward Jonathan's booth. Her heart pounded as she practically collapsed into the seat beside him, her whole body shaking with adrenaline and fear. Derek's face darkened with rage as he started after her. But Jonathan had already moved, positioning himself protectively in front of the booth. I think you should leave now, he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that made Derek pause. This isn't over, Derek hissed, his eyes boring into Julia with a promise that made her blood run cold. I know where you work now. I know where you live. This isn't over by a long shot. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments. Sometimes sharing our stories helps others feel less alone. As Derek stormed toward the door, Julia realized that her problems hadn't disappeared. They'd just gotten much, much worse. The silence that followed Derek's departure felt almost as heavy as his threatening presence had been. Julia sat trembling in Jonathan's booth, her wrist already showing the dark fingerprints where Derek had gripped her. Around the diner, concerned whispers had begun, and Mrs. Chun hurried over with a bag of ice and a cup of hot tea. Honey, the older woman said gently, her accent thick with worry. Are you okay? Should we call the police? Julia shook her head quickly, tears threatening to spill over. He didn't technically do anything illegal, and calling the police will just make him angrier. She'd learned that lesson the hard way before. Jonathan slid into the booth across from her, his face grave but kind. Julia, that man is dangerous. You can't just hope he'll go away. You don't understand, she whispered, pressing the ice against her wrist. Derek is. He's connected. His family has money, influence. When I tried to report him before, somehow the complaints just disappeared. The officers who responded acted like I was wasting their time. She watched Jonathan's expression change, a flash of something she couldn't quite identify crossing his features. What do you mean, connected? His father owns half the businesses in my old town. Derek never had to face consequences for anything. Ever. That's part of why I ran. I knew no one would believe me over him. Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the rain still streaking the windows. Finally, he spoke. Julia, I need to tell you something. My name is Jonathan Mitchell, but what I haven't mentioned is that I own Mitchell Industries. The name hit her like a thunderbolt. Mitchell Industries, the tech company that had transformed from a small startup into a billion-dollar empire in just 15 years. She'd seen Jonathan's face on magazine covers in the grocery store checkout line, though he looked different in person, more approachable somehow. She stared at him, struggling to process this revelation. But you come here for coffee and read paperback novels. He smiled softly. Money doesn't change who you are inside, Julia. I grew up in a town just like this one. Sometimes a man needs to remember where he comes from. His expression grew serious again. But right now, what matters is that Derek Walsh just threatened someone under my protection. I'm not under your protection, she protested automatically. You are now, he said simply. No one should have to live in fear the way you're living. And unlike Derek's small-town connections, I have resources that reach a lot further. Mrs. Chun had been listening from nearby, and now she approached the table again. Julia, dear, why don't you take tomorrow off? Give yourself time to figure things out. I can't afford to miss work, Julia started to protest, but Jonathan held up a hand. Consider it paid leave, he said quietly. And Julia, Derek was wrong about one thing. This is over. You just don't know it yet. For the first time in months, Julia felt a tiny spark of hope flicker in her chest. Maybe she didn't have to face this alone. Maybe someone with the power to actually help had finally heard her. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales like this one. But even as hope bloomed, she couldn't shake the memory of Derek's final words, or the promise of retribution she'd seen burning in his eyes. 3 weeks later, Julia stood behind the counter of the Golden Spoon Diner, but everything had changed in ways she could never have imagined. The bruises on her wrist had faded, but more importantly, the constant knot of fear in her stomach had finally begun to unravel. Derek hadn't returned to the diner, though she'd learned from Jonathan that he'd tried. It turned out that when someone with Jonathan's resources and connections decided to protect someone, they were very thorough about it. Derek had found himself facing a restraining order backed by evidence that his family's local influence couldn't make disappear. More than that, some of his past behavior toward other women had suddenly come to light, painting a picture that even his father's money couldn't completely whitewash. Jonathan still came to the diner regularly, though their relationship had evolved beyond simple customer and waitress. He had insisted on upgrading the diner's security system and had quietly arranged for Mrs. Chun to hire additional staff, so Julia never had to work alone. More importantly, he'd helped Julia understand that asking for help wasn't weakness. It was courage. You know, he said one evening as she refilled his coffee cup, I've been thinking about expanding my foundation's work to include support for domestic violence survivors. Julia smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. Over the past weeks, she'd learned that beneath Jonathan's business success was a man who genuinely cared about using his resources to help others. That sounds wonderful. I'd like to help if you think I could be useful. I think, he said, catching her hand gently as she set down the coffee pot, that you'd be invaluable. You understand what it's like to need help, and how hard it can be to accept it. Their friendship had grown slowly, built on conversations about books and dreams, and the courage it took to start over. Julia had never imagined that the worst night of her recent life would lead to some of the best days she'd known in years. Mrs. Chun bustled over with a fresh slice of apple pie. On the house, she announced, beaming at both of them. For the man who helped our Julia find her smile again. As the evening wound down and the last customers headed home to their families, Julia reflected on how completely her life had transformed. She still worked at the diner. She'd grown to love this community too much to leave. But now she also had plans. She was enrolled in online courses to become a counselor, funded by a scholarship from Jonathan's foundation. She had an apartment with a security system and neighbors who looked out for her. Most importantly, she had learned that she deserved to be safe, to be valued, to be protected. Ready to head home? Jonathan asked as she untied her apron. Almost, she said, taking one last look around the diner that had become so much more than a workplace. It was the place where her new life had begun, where she'd learned that sometimes strangers become guardian angels, and where she discovered that courage could bloom even in the darkest moments. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement like tiny stars fallen to earth. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales. Thank you for joining Julia on her journey from fear to hope. And remember, we all deserve to feel safe and valued, no matter where life has taken us.